So hello to everyone who's watching and welcome to Kasari's new interview series where we speak to members of the BU community on the work that they're doing and how it intersects with anti-racism. If you're listening to this, I'm going to assume that you know who we are and what we do, but if not, hi, it's nice to meet you. That's me and Mari. Mari, say hi. Mari has the green background. Are members of Kasari, which is the CAS Anti-Racist Initiative. We're an independently run student organization made up of undergrads, graduate students, faculty members, and staff at BU who are working to make CAS, the College of Arts and Sciences, a more inclusive and equitable place for BIPOC individuals. Before we get started, we at Kasari want to acknowledge that those of us who are not Indigenous reside on stolen land which was undeniably acquired through the process of systematic genocide and murder of Indigenous communities by European colonialists and settlers, and a process through which non-Indigenous people still profit from today. Most importantly, we want to emphasize that we couldn't do the work that we're doing now without the work that Indigenous activists and leaders have been doing for a really long time, going back several decades and definitely even further. Anti-racism stands alongside anti-colonialism, and these two things shouldn't be seen as separate. We are grateful towards and learn so much from activists like Tara Hauska of the Ojibwe Cochiching First Nation, who works on issues of water and land protection, as well as Indigenous participation and inclusion when it comes to public policy. She was on site to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline and is working right now, like literally right now, on the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline in Minnesota. So please take the time to look that up and support it however you can. I don't know when this interview goes out exactly, but as of today, tomorrow is what's nationally acknowledged as Thanksgiving. So if you're going to be participating, please act accordingly and contribute to Indigenous peoples in all the ways that you can, whether that means monetarily or by showing up for Indigenous issues through activism. This definitely isn't a one-time thing, and it has to become a constant practice, but tomorrow of all days, as of this recording, is a day where it's extra obvious. To get into the actual introductions, my name is V, she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm currently on Mohican and Haudenosaunee land. I'm one of the publicity managers at Kasari. I'm a senior and an art history major with a minor in English, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to be complaining about these departments probably constantly. So if you were looking for someone to be like, yay, art history and English, that's not me, but I will listen to your complaints, and that's okay. Mari?
Okay, hello. Thank you, V. I am in fact Mari. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm coming to y'all today from southwestern Connecticut, where I live on Paugussett, Wappinger, and Pokanock land. I am also a senior, and according to the BU system, I'm majoring in classical civilizations and minoring in computer science, but for all intents and purposes, I have gotten a divorce from classical studies, and my relationship with comp sci is no strings attached at best. I am a member of the Kasari publicity team as well, and also one of the co-founders, the other of whom is Nadia Fry Leinhos. I would like to now welcome our inaugural guest. Mary, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Mary Battenfeld. My pronouns are she, her, and I am sitting and speaking today from Jamaica Plain, which is on Massachusetts land, and I, particularly on the day before the National Day of Mourning, otherwise known as Thanksgiving, I particularly acknowledge the contributions and of the Massachusetts people and of Native and Indigenous peoples. And I also acknowledge and I'm very grateful for Kasari and for both V and Mari and all of you who are bringing this important work to CAS. I have not been long at BU. I came in the fall of 2018 as part of the merger / takeover with Wheelock College. I was on the faculty at Wheelock for nearly 20 years, where I among other things, I was chair of general education and helped to revise our general education curriculum. So we had two requirements in diversity inclusion. One, a course that was about understanding privilege and power and systemic racism from a more personal perspective. One was more on content related to diversity and inclusion. And I taught there courses at Wheelock, courses in African American literature and Native American literature, among other things. And at BU, I have developed a course in Native and Indigenous Studies, which I'm teaching now for the second time. Oh, and I'm in American and New England Studies. Right. Right.
Okay, thank you so much for introducing yourself. So I guess we'll start off with the first question that we have for you today. So since June 2020 and the reinvigoration of diversity and inclusion initiatives across the country, have you seen any shifts or changes in your department? And if so, what do they look like and are they ongoing?
Thank you. I have seen the beginnings of conversations. I attended as a departmental member one meeting to discuss diversity inclusion, and particularly in terms of hiring and faculty retention. The presence of Professor Kendi has had an amazingly positive impact, and just in being, I think, raising the consciousness. I would have to say, in terms of courses, more longer term initiatives, I have not seen what I would call any substantial initiatives.
Should I follow up, I'll follow up on that? Yeah. So we've seen a lot of different departments and majors where they're building these like diversity and inclusion like teams or committees. So I was wondering if that's something that's happening in your department, and if they are, like, if you think that they're doing the work they're supposed to be doing, like if it will be effective in the long term, like you were saying.
Right. So my American Studies is actually, it's a program, not a department. So it's pretty small, and faculty all have their lines in other departments. I also teach in the writing program, and I've seen that very much in the writing program, and that's translated to like lots of Swati in the writing program. I particularly call out as a leader of that, and it's been really encouraging faculty to be engaged, to think about revising courses, and also curricular, lots of conversations about, particularly during the pandemic, about what it means to have an inclusive pedagogy at a time when we know that the COVID pandemic has a disproportionately impact on students and communities of color. So again, in my department, I honestly can't say that I have seen it that much. In fairness, everything's kind of not being, since the pandemic, it's much harder to have meetings or other kinds of things that might be going on, right?
All right, so in terms of inclusivity and anti-racist work, like pre-existing, so before June 2020, where do you feel like AMNES is? And if you feel like they're somewhat behind, what sort of factors do you think led to the program being kind of in the place that it is, or that it was prior to June 2020?
Okay. I think the strength of the program is in the graduate students who are have developed some amazing courses. For example, before I developed the course in Native and Indigenous Studies, I worked with a graduate student who was doing research and work on that, and then she has now moved back to New Mexico, where she is from. But she had already developed a course in Native Indigenous Studies. There's been a lot of students have been doing work on like queer studies, on really reframing, having a number of different courses. There's also been, again, American Studies is sort of allied, so with like history and other departments. So there has been work, not just a hiring of Dr. Kendi, but also Professor Paula Austin, who is just, I feel so lucky. Her office is right next to mine, and she is just doing really fantastic work. So I see it as more the work of individuals in a sense, than any kind of sort of more systemic change.
Yeah, I think that's something that we notice a lot too, like especially with Kasari work. It ends up being like smaller groups or like by a like case by case basis scale instead of like overarching, because you have to jump through so many hoops, and they always bring up the like financial aspect of it, that we don't have money for that. And so yeah, we find that that's extremely similar too. I don't know how different programs are from like majors, I guess, or like from like departments, but I guess we were wondering if like how attached the faculty members, like the faculty on hand in your program, are to like the traditional like pillars of their program. I'm talking about like the required like classes. Like for example, I was an English major, and like that class we were required to take like Brit Lit and like major authors, and kids really didn't like it because it was extremely like Eurocentric and wasn't really like providing the kinds of perspectives that we wanted to, like as students of color, as like marginalized students. So I was just wondering like what the attitude is toward like courses like that, if you have them.
Yes, so I'm not sure we do have some required courses, but I think the larger context for American and New England studies, and what I've heard students say, is that it's a department that's very much tied to sort of buildings, architecture. There has been, and I have heard students wanting more, conversation and classes that really address some of the racism and monuments, and sort of looking at sort of how buildings and structures. And I have also heard students say basically that American Studies does too much old buildings built by white men. It's kind of, as one student put it to me. So yeah, there is some of that. And we have a very small undergraduate major, and our program is more graduate. So it's not so much that they have requirements in that sense. I have again heard conversations, and I think for graduate students, one of the big issues is how you understand research. I think much of the way we understand what is valid research is based in Western epistemology and knowledge, and it privileges a certain type of knowledge, and in particular it discourages and disparagingly calls identity politics as kind of not a valid form of research. So I think that's kind of a more, and I think that's more systemic throughout BU, actually, the way we, from the hub curriculum, where the way not only is, I actually did a search of race and racism in all of the hubs, and I think the word appears 4 times, and like twice it's basically patting BU on the back to say, oh, we really were, this institution was great. We admitted the first, African-American medical student back in the 19th century. So, I think, and a lot of that's in the way BU and CAS looks at what counts as knowledge.
I just have a quick question, I guess, to like follow up with that. Do you think that reflects like how like the field itself is like outside of BU, or do you think that's just like something that's within like institutions of like BU?
I think that there are other places that are challenging it more, that have departments that are really looking, and particularly places that might have an actual department or program in Native and Indigenous studies. I mean, I do think that, areas like, women gender studies, and there are certainly places at BU that do that. And so I guess it'd be a both and, maybe, if that's not too wishy-washy, that it is part of what academic institutions are, and a core part of their power and privilege is how knowledge and what is valid knowledge and who gets to do knowledge gets defined. And I think that is very much a part of higher education. I do think BU may be a little behind the curve even in that context.
All right, so as you've mentioned, I think a few times, you're teaching CAS AM 220 Native American and Indigenous Studies, a course that you developed. Can you tell us a little bit more about the course, how you integrate anti-racism into it, and also the state of Indigenous studies at BU? We at CASARI kind of know that it's in a bad state, but we'd like to hear like your perspective on where it is, where it's been in the past, and where it potentially could go in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, when I first came to BU, one of the first things I encountered was a graduate student who was taking like a course at Harvard in Native and Indigenous Studies, because BU offered nothing whatsoever. And the way she had to do it was to like take the course there and then like do an independent study at BU and have it like count as an independent study. So she didn't even, and I was like, that was crazy. And I sort of looked around and I was actually pretty loath to develop a course because I am not, my ancestors are settler colonialists, not, I'm not native or indigenous person. And so supported in part by some students and I developed the course and got it hub approved. And honestly, one of my goals in doing that course is to get enough interest to hire a full-time Native person in Native and Indigenous Studies to eventually get at least a minor, if not a major, to sort of use the course as an entry to hire Native and Indigenous faculty and to really have a robust program.
So I guess our next question is, how have you yourself engaged with issues of racial justice and inclusivity in your own work and field? And do you think what you've done or those practices are widespread in your department?
So, I think of myself as someone who does a lot of community work. I've been, particularly in education, I've been a longtime Boston Public School parent. My children are children of color, so I have gone through an urban public school system in that context, as a parent in that context, and I've done a lot of advocacy work around, and then also I research the history of education, and one of my current projects is on a 19th century African-American lawyer, Robert Morris, who brought the first school desegregation case, Roberts versus City of Boston. So those pieces are kind of connected. And I think part of the anti-racism work of that is to both highlight the buried histories of someone like Robert Morris or Charles Eastman, who was the first Native American graduate of Boston University in 1890, but also to really make it clear that research is, even historic research, isn't just in the past, is very much connected to, and that part of the responsibility of being, for me, as being an academic, is to use the skills I have to engage in anti-racist practices, not only in the classroom, but in the larger community and society.
All right. Just trying to see which question makes sense to follow up with. All right, so we've talked a little bit about your personal practice, the course that you're currently teaching. So I'm interested in learning a little bit about what professors / classes in the program that you're part of in particular would you feel are best suited for students who are kind of looking for a more intersectional approach to the discipline?
I know you had that in one. Maybe can you maybe rephrase it just a little while I think about that?
Yeah, so basically what we're interested in learning is that like V mentioned earlier, in the English department, for example, they have the Brit Lit class, and those sorts of classes certainly privileged, like a Eurocentric view and whatnot. But then there are classes that are kind of like the diversity requirement classes. Some of them do it well, some of them do it a little less well. So I was just wondering what sort of those kind of classes exist in AMNEST.
Right. So, and again, so many of AMNEST's courses are actually in other departments. So, you know, so I mentioned Paula Austin. So like any of the courses she teaches, any of them, and we have, you know, so I guess it's hard to answer with the particular program we have because we have so few undergraduate offerings that are actually in American Studies. There's literally like 4 of them. There is a sort of an Intro to American Studies, which I'm going to be teaching for the first time in the spring, and I'm really looking for, and I'll take any suggestions actually for things that I should be included on that. And often that course, I don't know that much about how it is at BU, but often that course has, to my mind, not really embedded kind of anti-racist and diverse perspectives in the way it can. It often is much more about, again, I don't really know that much how it's been taught here, so I can't say that much about it, but it's often, and it also has often been privileging sort of a literary and written narrative, kind of, you know, great writers, and even if one of those great writers is, you know, not a cisgender white man, then still they're dealing with great writers, as opposed to how do we think of literature and how do we think of cultural productions in, you know, multiple and more complex ways. So it's, and the other, I mean, the other thing with American Studies is that it began historically as very much a nationalist narrative with a kind of a, you know, even when it involved critique, it says sort of this is the American way of doing things and the way it sort of privileges democracy and sort of thinks of democracy as something to be celebrated, which it is, to be sure, but as but not interrogating who actually has been allowed to vote. You know, if you look at the history of American democracy, you know, pretty much nobody's, except for property white Christian men, have been allowed to vote for much of our history, and that's still continuing. I mean, that's kind of who the Trump voters are and who Trump is too, is appealed to.
Okay, next question. I think we've seen a lot of this, like I think we understand this impression, but how essential is centering marginalized voices to your own practice and also your program's practice? And do you think that that is something that is a mandatory part of educating students and like even like yourself?
Yeah, I think it's central to mine. I mean, I feel like I would be committing kind of pedagogical, educational research malpractice if, I mean, knowing how I understand and what I know about American history and culture, to be in, you know, a Department of American or program of American and New England Studies, and not to be including in Indigenous voices and African American voices and Latinx voices and Asian voices and all the diversity, would be presenting a false narrative. And I think part of the problem with it more systemically, and again, I don't know how much this is just my department versus I think it's, you know, kind of wider BU, wider academic problem, is that it's left up to kind of individual faculty, and faculty sort of develop their own expertise. There's not a sense of what needs to be included to present, not only for, you know, because that's what students want and need, but because it's true, right? So you would never have, I don't know, somebody in physics saying, I'm not going to teach theories of relativity, I'm just going to do Newtonian physics because that's what I do. But you have that, you have faculty in English saying, I'm just going to teach, you know, Fitzgerald and Hemingway and not the Harlem Renaissance because I don't really know the Harlem Renaissance, right? So I think there needs to be, a stronger sense of, you've got to teach what is true, and that you have to divide whatever, even though you may have gone to graduate school 30 years ago, and you studied, this particular writer or this particular issue, that doesn't mean you get to keep teaching it from that perspective if it's been proven to be inadequate, flawed, not correct, and if it's not kind of good pedagogy in terms of teaching a class for meeting the needs of students.
Thank you, Mary, for talking, especially about what you were just talking about with the sort of like pushback against professors kind of diversifying what they know about, and being more inclusive in the classes that they teach, despite the fact that it might include them learning something additional, because it's an argument that we've faced again and again and again in meetings and town halls and things like that we've attended. So the next question kind of, I think, sort of speaks a little bit to this. We are very interested in like the detailed aspects of kind of what's going on in programs and departments. So I'd like to ask you about the approach to syllabi development and syllabi accessibility in your program.
It's very individual. The faculty does it, and I don't think anybody checks it, or, again, in it may be like for graduate students who, when they do syllabi, that someone checks them or looks at it. But it's, because I've submitted courses to the Hub, I sort of initially had to do syllabi for that, but those were really just about no one's really looking at those Hub courses for evidence of diversity, in a sense. And in fact, I think sometimes the Hub guidelines cut against diversity, like when they're what is it, the oral communication one, or that one, which is just so much about traditional Western rhetoric, and it has, like, I did not include my Native and Indigenous Studies course in that because the way the Hub has defined oral communication, it's so traditional. It didn't, or so, I should say, so Eurocentric. It didn't work for the course. So I don't really think anyone is looking at or analyzing the courses in my department. Quick answer, I guess.
Do people like Hub? Because on the student point of view, I don't think we like Hub. I don't know if Mari, if you've heard anything from people, but like, I think that for us, Hub doesn't apply because we're seniors. So we don't have to worry about Hub.
Yeah.
But I think for other people, it's kind of confusing. And to me, it feels like a continuation of this idea within majors where you're just scattering the diversity things sometimes within it without having it be meaningful to your actual academic journey, I guess. I hate that I just used the term academic journey. That was gross. But yeah, I'm just wondering what faculty think about the Hub. Is it useful for you, or is it just another thing that is coming down from admin, I guess?
Yeah. It depends. I mean, I've heard faculty complain about the bureaucracy. I mean, to me, what's good about the Hub is that it focuses on learning outcomes and sort of really, which is a little bit more of a push to faculty to think about their class as teaching as opposed to just imparting what I want to impart in terms of some knowledge. And so, but I do know that there are a lot of faculty who just sort of think of it as kind of, I have to check this off, I'll put it in, but it's another onerous bureaucracy thing that BU's doing. And I have heard students, complain about it in different ways. I even had a couple of students say they thought it was a plot to get more tuition dollars because it might make you take longer to complete your program.
You know what, at this point, I would believe anything. If someone was he's doing this for the money, I'd be like, yes, BU is doing this for money. You're right. Yeah.
No, I think there are some, I mean, some of the people who are designing the Hub are doing things in the Hub and the way it's being used are really good. And I think as I said, in particular, like I also teach in Kilachand Honors College and in the writing program. And I think they're really thinking about and using the hub in positive ways.
Yeah, it's complex. This is my actual question now. What kind of curricular change to promote inclusivity would you like to see in your program? Like outside of what you do, like is there something that you'd like to see that's like more mainstream? Because you were saying there's only like 4 classes or something that were actually like pertain to more intersectional approaches.
Right. I mean, I'd like to see, to the extent that the program continues to be sort of about buildings, monuments, I'd like to see a course that really explicitly is about race and anti-race, and the way that sort of physical monuments and buildings kind of, in both the history of what they present, and also the sort of understanding kind of what's not there as a monument, what is not present, and what the absences as well. So, and I think that would help to kind of challenge, think in different ways about, like, 2 of the biggest monuments in Boston are of historians who were incredibly racist. Samuel Eliot Morison, who wrote the biography of Columbus, and also a history textbook that was used for years and years that was very, I don't know, best I can say, soft on slavery. That's not really, I mean, I'll just say racist, right? Had racist. And then Francis Parkman, who again wrote, used particularly wrote about the West in very racist ways. So I think that could be a really rich area to look at, to sort of, and then I also think a course that, I guess again that really centers, which I'm going to try to do more in the introductory American Studies course, to really center the notion of the United States as a place that is both beautifully diverse and horrifically racist at the same time, and to kind of what does that mean to, and then also sort of to make more global transnational connections, because that's a whole problem with American Studies, I think, is the way it's defines America as the world, and sort of unique and worthy of study in that sense.
That's interesting, because I think that the art history department has like that exact same problem. I'm taking 2 classes right now where like we're talking about like monuments and monumentality, and how even like organizations like UNESCO for so long were so obsessed with like the traditional monument, like the built environment and things like that. So yeah, I think when we change approaches to that, like certain departments definitely like have like same issues. And then if you can, whatever the flaws you find in one, hopefully help with the flaws in the other, and they can like work together on that. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and art history is very, much connected, aligned with American and New England studies, and they, and again, there's some people that are doing good work, but it's not, how much. There was in art history, and she was partly in American Studies last year, there was a faculty member who was studying, it's like her field was like Navajo and Hopi art and architecture, and I was really hoping you would hire her and she would stay, but she didn't.
To follow up kind of on what we're talking about here, from like my perspective in the classics department, I've always been very interested in the role of Greek and Roman monumentality in the sort of construction of the architectural face of the, like, especially the governmental United States, like both the use of the sort of the iconic Doric columns and the very white austere Greek architecture, and how it's kind of like it's enveloped in this notion of imperialism and and like national identity in the United States. I've always been wished there was a class like that in classics, and then also kind of how that intersects with like statuary and how the sort of the how that has come into white supremacy, and it's kind of a total fallacy because Greek statues weren't actually white, they were painted, and it's only later on that Europeans in the 17 and 1800s kind of romanticized the essentially like degraded statues. So just to switch gears kind of entirely, we are living in the pandemic and we're living in this thing called Learn From Anywhere. And we were wondering if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on Learn From Anywhere, and especially on the impact on students, faculty, staff within your program, and then any other students, faculty, or staff you've interacted with. And then in particularly in your program, how has LFA been handled and what support has been provided or not provided?
Yeah, so it's a big one, and I'm not a fan of LFA. I guess I often put another F in there, in fact.
Deserved.
But I mean, one of the sort of more direct issues is in trying to get for graduate students trying to keep their funding, and American studies, and I think a lot of the humanities field has made the decision to not admit any new graduate students for next year, in order to provide the support for the students who are here because of the budget cuts of the all American studies, and pretty much, again, I think most programs are being asked to cut, in the writing program. This is resulting in part-time faculty losing their jobs. I don't have tenure. I'm actually worried about losing my job. So the whole kind of finances of it is very worrisome, and also very irking, I guess, to see the big computer science center coming up across the street from my office at the same time as everyone's getting cutbacks and BUs, so yeah. And in terms of again, the pedagogy, I feel like a larger problem with BU is that as a research one institution, it buys into this notion that teaching is really not very important, and values faculty more for the research they do than for the teaching, and just pedagogically Learn From Anywhere is doesn't make sense. Particularly, it doesn't make sense in smaller discussion-based classes to have and have asynchronous and then it creates more work for faculty. And I don't say this I don't do it, but at the same time we're getting our salaries cut, and and then if you care about it and want to do it right, it takes a lot of extra work. And then at the same time, for those of us like me who have children, it's the needs, the complicated lives that we're all living in are just not being acknowledged in that way. And instead the action is, and what I'm particularly disturbed about Learn From Everywhere is the way it's really a surveillance, punitive, driven, and the way, and as far as I know, maybe more if anyone's collecting any kind of data on disproportionate impact, particularly in terms of sort of surveil. I mean, I know I'm having a lot of students of color who seem or expressing anyway more of an impact, more family members, more issues with family members, sick, getting kicked, not being able to get in Blackboard because in all the stress they might have missed a couple days of their symptoms checkers, and so know that I can gather that I'm hearing students say little to no support for either the practical problems of living in someplace where you have lousy Wi-Fi, or you're taking care of your 3 younger brothers and sisters, and or emotional, the stress of the emotion and kind of the loneliness of it too. So I feel like I wish we were really beefing up that kind of, I shouldn't use, I'm a vegan and here I'm using the phrase beefing up, I shouldn't do that, right? Who are bolstering, right? Support for students as opposed to punishing students who are not in compliance.
Yeah, I'm really not liking I don't know if this is like professor's choice or like BU, but like you have to be on camera, or like we're not gonna like count your participation or something like that. Because like for me, I have ADHD and I actually focus less when I'm on camera because I'm paying so much attention to like how I'm moving and whatever, and how I look on like screen instead of like the actual class. So it's super annoying to me when I have to sit through these classes, especially when they're like almost 3 hours long. And
Yeah.
I'm just like sitting there and it's super annoying. And I don't know if this is at BU, but I've heard definitely that like a lot of students of color are getting punished because they're like on camera for things that are definitely like disproportionately affecting, like, for example, like Black kids, like, oh, you're moving too much, like that's like a point off or something. That's like, you're like already like disrupting someone's like private life and their personal space. And
Right.
I don't think you should be literally policing what they're doing in their own home. Like, I really don't like that part of it.
Right.
I don't know if you have any thoughts, Mari, about that, but.
Yeah, just I have a few to directly respond to that. Like, I've had professors who admonished us for seeming to speak to someone else in the video, and it's like, you can't, students are living in their houses, they're living with other people. You can't expect them to act as though that they're in a lecture hall and that they're doing exactly the same thing as they would be doing if they were in person classes. They're not. This is a completely different scenario, and when you do that to students, you make them feel so much more uncomfortable than they already are. And also, I wanted to kind of touch back on something you were saying, Mary, about how from the professor's side of things, you're experiencing pay cuts and you're being expected to do even more work. And I think that the students have a similar experience in that we're being expected to do more work as well. And we're not experiencing a pay cut per se, but we're still paying the same amount of money for an education that just is not the same as it was prior to March 2020. So there seems to be, it's bizarre to me that there seems to be a disconnect between the faculty and the students to some extent. I'm not saying this is the case in all scenarios, because we've definitely, like yourself, we've spoken to a number of faculty members who seem to be very attuned to the fact that there's shared suffering, I guess, but it seems like institutionally that is not the case. And there's lots of instances where I feel like there's a lack of empathetic connection on both sides. And I think it's an issue that's like really exacerbated right now, but it's something that's always existed at BU. And I think it'll be really important going forward to kind of interrogate that a little bit more and think more about how professors and students can kind of see each other as people.
And I do think that comes from the top down, particularly when I compare it to Wheelock College, where I was at for many years, where we had a very different culture. And the things that I do normally, pretty much every faculty at Wheelock did. And I feel like at least what students tell me and what I observe, I feel few faculty do it here. And I do think there's a message that comes from the top down, from the president and provost, that is very unempathetic in the kind of messages. I don't know, again, what messages you get as students, but
Bad ones.
ones we get as faculty. What's that?
Bad ones, the ones we don't like. Everyone yelled at that one letter that we got from President Brown or whatever. And then there's that apology letter that, again, no one liked. And so,
yes, because it wasn't really an apology.
No, not really.
I don't know how to apologize.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So they sent one recently about which I opened it up. It was, so there's these category 4 faculty and staff who are not supposed to come and came, but I opened it up and it was like category 4 protocols over the holidays. And I thought, oh, they're going to let category 4 get tested. And it was like, no, you will be punished and you will be reported and you will be doing all these. It was, thank you for the holiday message. Right. Yeah. And and I think like a lot of things, it's like the people who have privilege are doing, even though we're all suffering together, some of us are suffering more than others. And, a administrator or faculty member who's with a higher salary than I do is not bothered as much by, not having any, having some of the benefits cut and not getting a raise. So, and then also, I think, again, it's very disproportionately on, everything we know about childcare says that women are doing the bulk of it, and it's just none of that is factored in. And it's been, and for me, it's been, I think I told Marty, I'm not sure if I told you, but so my daughter was in a car accident and I was kind of living at Spalding Rehab Hospital in Charlestown for a while. And I'm like, I'm not going to go in and teach in person when I'm with all these, medical in a medical setting all the time. And so, and the students were very understanding, but I'm not sure administrators would have been. So.
Yeah,
I realized. I think that's our last question. Is that our last question?
Yes. I think that is our last question.
This was a great interview. Feel like we learned a lot, stuff that we already knew, but it's interesting to hear from faculty, I think, point of view, because a lot of times, so like, for example, like with advising, I've had situations where like, I've either never talked to my advisor outside of like getting my like code or whatever. So I don't really know what goes on in the department, or like actually getting to know a faculty member and speaking about it. So this was very informative. So I guess we just want to thank you for coming and agreeing to do the interview. And I hope people keep watching. We're going to do more interviews and hopefully more people say more mean things about BU so I don't have to, because I've said a lot. I don't want to get in trouble. I know I'm graduating like a month, but like time is ticking, but sometimes BU moves faster. So